The Bobby O Show.
Welcome to the Bobby O Show. My name is Bob O'Potzner, and have I got a great show lined up for you today. We all know, if we keep our eyes alert and think about what's going on, that our country is in deep crisis right now. I happen to think we're in a constitutional crisis, and we have a lot of work to do, but I'm also an optimist. Even though things are not great right now in some respects, I have a lot of hope. And today I have a wonderful guest, Kathleen Warner, who I've known for years, who worked Jim Himes' administration. She was regional district director. She'll talk about that in a few moments. And she was involved mostly in 2008 to 2011 with Himes and also other periods of time. And there are a lot of parallels between what was going on in our country then and now, at least economically. I want to talk a little bit about the rule of law, democracy, and how we can resolve the crisis we have. We will not resolve the problems. We'll discuss them all and give you a lot of good ideas. And I want to start, before I introduce Kathleen, with a quote from the Constitution of the United States of America, which we should keep in mind every day. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. We should never forget those immortal words as we go through our life every day. Kathleen, welcome aboard.
Hey, Bob. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. Kathleen, tell us about your background a little bit.
Gosh. So lawyer by training, Bob, until recently, lifelong Connecticut resident, born and bred. So a couple years ago, moved out to Montana, but my heart is really in New England and in Connecticut, where so much of my family is. As you mentioned, I worked for Jim Himes. I worked for him in 2008 through 2011. And frankly, coming out of what was then a incredible economic downturn, left investment banking, left Wall Street to go work for a person who I had so much admiration for, so much alignment, if you will, and a person who had and has a ton of integrity. So I was really lucky at the time to go and work on this successful campaign, and then become his district director. And I left there in 2011, left sort of the official side of the office, and have done a bunch of stuff largely supporting economic growth and economic development on the East Coast, all over the country. But I've always come back to working with democracy, either as a volunteer or in an official capacity, because I care about this country. I mean, that almost brought tears to my eyes. That's something that I could recite, that part of the Constitution, which is just so important. And I had almost forgotten about the tranquility, because it doesn't feel like particularly tranquil times right now, Bob.
Absolutely not. And by the way, I see behind you is one of your Duke coffee cups. And of course, Duke is probably the most heavily represented university, thank you very much, on my shows. We're both Duke grads. I went Duke Law, she went Duke undergraduate. And we have a perspective, because when I went to Duke, Richard Nixon's he went to Duke also, many years before I did, and his portrait in the law school auditorium had been taken down like a year or two before I got to Duke, and it was a very controversial time period. So we have that Duke connection. But you're living now in Montana. And
I am.
It's really hard to stereotype different parts of the country, but just give me a little snippet as to what it's like differently living in Montana than it was in Connecticut in terms of the political arena. Obviously, it's a red state, and we're Connecticut blue.
Yeah. No, it's been, geographically, it's huge, right? It's basically the size of all of New England plus New Jersey down to DC. So it's very spread out. It has a population of less than 1.1 million, 1.2 million. It has historically been a really purple state. And some of the great Democratic leaders, Brian Schweitzer, Steve Bullock, have been governor here. So Montana has this really, really strong libertarian streak, and has always supported the right to be left alone. We have one of the strongest constitutions in the country, which was recently interpreted by courts near and dear to both our hearts, Bob, as our Constitution gives Montanans a right to clean air and clean water, and also a right to abortion and women's health. So it's really an interesting place, but has gone really, really dark red, particularly during this last election. So for me, a lifelong New Englander, East Coaster, it's been, gosh, I hate to say challenging or interesting, but both of those things, and sometimes really dispiriting. But I think the country as a whole, you're seeing what is happening here on steroids, if you will. But it's also helped to give me a real perspective on being outside my little liberal coastal bubble, if you will. So I think I have newfound perspective and not wanting to think in some stereotypes that I might have thought in the past.
One of the big differences, in my opinion, I was on the Board of Education for 15 years. It's a very different perspective than dealing with a congressman. On the other hand, it's more hands-on, because if that class size gets beyond 20, for example, you might get 50 people at a meeting, and you have to be responsive to that. But in those days, when I was on the Board of Ed, around your time frame, a little before that, people could talk. And you and I, if we disagreed on political things, we could talk and disagree and go get a vanilla milkshake. I don't drink, but it's a vanilla milkshake. You can have chocolate if you want. But nowadays that doesn't exist. And one thing that's key to me is, I remember Jim Himes, when you were working with him, was big on town hall meetings, getting out with the people.
Yes.
We're seeing Republicans are afraid to talk to the people. I can talk to you a little about why it was important then to do that kind of town hall thing, and why it's important even more so now when we have this schism between the reds and the blues.
Yeah, 100%. And going back to the words that you mentioned from the Constitution, common, right? We've lost sight of what is common between us. And Bob, you and I have a bit of a history when we were on opposite sides in a fairly heated way back in the day, and somehow were to find a path forward as friends where we had admiration and respect for one another. And you're absolutely right. Back in the day when Jim was first elected, Wall Street was cratering. People were super angry and afraid. Obamacare was being discussed, debated, and it was so heated. And at the time, at times it was crazy overwhelming. We'd have these town halls, and Jim was very, very adamant, and I think still is, about, these are constituents. The people who elected him have a right, and he has an obligation to show up and listen and hear from all his constituents, which is challenging because not everybody agrees. But we were sort of ground zero for Tea Party, the Tea Party disruptions. Frankly, I had a line into the FBI because we got a fair amount of death threats. He got threats. It was scary at times. And we still did the town halls. We went to coffee shops. We went to Little League baseball games. We went to the Puerto Rican Day Parade. We sat in Fortune 500 boardrooms. We, because I was his director, was with him a lot, but he made himself available. And it was not like it was easy. It wasn't like it was, all supportive and all roses. It was really, really, really hard. And the amount of venom and vitriol was, a little bit overwhelming at times, but compared to today, we're now supercharged and on steroids. And it is disheartening is probably the least strong word I can use for the fact that representatives and senators, including in my now chosen home state of Montana, do not do town halls, do not show up, regardless of who is doing the asking. They will do very, very structured, like call-in radios, where they will take only a certain amount of calls. They do not make themselves available. The places in which they show up feel very, very antiseptic, frankly. And it's like they're in their very conservative little bubble. That might just be my bias, but I don't see them. And apparently they just, the senators here who are now both Republicans just do not make themselves available. And someone told me, and this is hearsay reporting, but that the governor's house went from being an open door where folks could walk in and talk to the governor to someplace that is no longer easily accessible. And that is just so disheartening.
I wrote a check. Was Fenster your senator?
Tester. Yeah. John Tester. Yeah.
I wrote, what I did for this past campaign was I didn't write that much money for Biden, for Kamala Harris, because I thought there was plenty of money. I picked out about 10 different states, and I sent your man a check or two. But you said a very important word, and you mentioned how you and I were on the opposite side of a case, and we disagreed. And you could see from our personalities, that those of you who are watching, we're fairly strong. Would you say we're fairly strong personalities, Kathleen?
That's understatement of the morning or the afternoon.
But the thing is that I knew immediately how bright and how compassionate you were of what your position, and it was respect. The word respect is so critical to what we do. And I don't feel like we have that kind of activity. I want to read you one more quote that I picked out for us tonight, because it dovetails what we're talking about. This is from John Adams. And he said, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And I picked this out of my little book on the Constitution, because the things that we're talking about, you and I right now, are things that people don't comprehend as being critical. Having a town hall where Grassley, the 91-year-old senator from, I forget what state he's from, Kansas or wherever he's from, Iowa, one of those places east of the West Mississippi River. But
your East Coast liberals showing there, Bob.
My daughter wanted to go to college at UCLA, and I said to her many years ago, "Here's Mississippi River. You're going east of Mississippi River, not going west."
Right.
But the point is, people were asking him questions, and he was offended by questions. If you're elected, when I was on the Board of Ed, if I couldn't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you don't want to hear from people criticizing you, what's going on? And so we have so many issues right now. We could talk about economic uncertainty we have. I don't usually check. I don't invest in the stock market that much, but I have some. And I check to see, when do I want to get rid of some stocks, because what's the next word Trump's going to say? And we had that kind of problem in 2008. I want to talk about the economic impact on politics right now that you see.
No, and I think the uncertainty is huge, but also like the flow of information, right? Back in 2008, when Jim was elected, I also want to touch back about, Grassley and some of these town halls.
Sure.
Where people are getting, rightly so, they're getting questioned. People are angry, really angry. Jim's predecessor in Connecticut 4, I think that's what helped to spur me, is that I went to a town hall, and with Jim's predecessor, who'd been in Congress for 22 years or something.
That Shays? Was that Shays?
Shays. It was Chris Shays, who was, what people
not
considered
a bad guy, not terrible guy.
Considered a moderate Republican. He only voted with Democrats when it didn't matter to his party, but I digress. But I went to a town hall, and I asked him a question, and I asked him why he voted the way he did on a matter. I don't remember exactly what it was. And he literally said to me, "How dare you ask that question? You obviously know nothing about the way things work. You're obviously wrong." Like, basically, dressed me down in the middle of a town hall. And it was so fascinating that he didn't think he should have to answer to a constituent. Now, it was really like, why did you vote that way given X, Y, and Z, right? But it was fascinating to me. He was so thin-skinned. And look, we had some people on the Democratic side, Bob, in our camp in Connecticut, who got a little thin-skinned themselves when they got questioned by constituents. They started to believe that, they started to forget, I guess, that they were elected by the people. So I get it. It's not an easy job. But at the end of the day, you're not, the notion that you're not there to be in service. I just don't really get that. And, again, it was when Jim came into office, it was an incredibly hard economic time. The economy was losing 700,000 jobs or so every month, right? People were feeling super worried about their financial stability. And even in some places like Fairfield County, which is incredibly wealthy, I think in places across the country which don't have that level of wealth, like living paycheck to paycheck, it was even more scary. Then you add in Obamacare, and people were like, why do we have to pay for all this stuff? It was a really, really challenging time. And I think that, at the time, looking at the status quo, people didn't believe in the status quo. And so you had this tsunami, if you will, but it also started up the Tea Party, right? And now it's sort of the same. I think I'm not a pundit. I don't know why, what happened. I have my own theories, and there's people way smarter than me who will tell you why Kamala Harris lost or John Tester lost. But I do think that the economic uncertainty was way greater, way deeper, and not as understood as it needed to be by the Democrats. And, this notion of how many of our people voted for Trump, Kamala, versus Kamala, fewer people came out in this election than they did in the prior. But there was definitely, a shift in confidence and like rising fear, rising anger that folks aren't being listened to, and that their economic security was way worse than was being put out, in the world. And there's a great article in Politico from a few months ago that talks about that, how job numbers and employment rates and all the stuff were not accurate in really capturing what was going on in the country. And
Kathleen, one thing I don't understand is, I'm going to cut you off. What I don't understand is this, and again, I compare my Board of Education experience to what's going on. No one should think that they have a right to their political office. Getting elected, sure. When I ran for student council vice president, which I won at Shelton High School when I was a vice president.
Unsurprising.
Thank you very much. I had to stuff the ballots, though. I did not. But the thing is that you do your best, and if people don't like what you're doing, you have a right. They have a right to vote you out of office. You're not 100%. Ordained to be in that position forever and ever. I once had a situation in which I raised on the Board of Ed the issue right when the Boy Scouts came out, not about anti-homosexuals.
Right.
And we had in our Board of Ed, we had a rule that said if you were a 501c3, a nonprofit, you could use our schools for free.
Right.
Well, I raised my hand in a meeting and said, well, wait a minute. If we let the Boy Scouts use our schools for free and not have to pay the normal fee to use our schools, aren't we condoning discrimination in doing that situation? Well, I want to change the policy saying you had to sign a clause that said, I will not discriminate. Well, when I made the first motion, it was 1-8, 1 in favor of my motion and 8 against.
Wow.
Next Board of Ed meeting, approximately 50 Boy Scouts came dressed in fully armed, full uniforms, and they were pointing at me. And I felt a little intimidated, but you know what? If I want to be on the Board of Ed, then I got to take it. P.S. My son was a varsity football player in those days and said, Dad, I kicked so-and-so's butt for trying to intimidate you. And I said, no, you can't do that. But the point is that we can't be afraid. And when Lisa Murkowski just said that she came out and said, we're afraid to make certain votes. If you're afraid, our system's in trouble. Do you have any comments about any of that?
100%. We are in trouble. I agree. There's what you call it a soft coup, an overthrow. What this administration is doing is attacking every foundation of our democracy and every facet of a democratic life, right? Like whether it's universities, whether it's law firms, whether it's the courts, whether it's language, right? The media, the authoritarianism that is happening. And, it's like when someone tells you who they are, believe them. I don't think a lot of us believed him and the people around him, but I think there is a lot of fear. And look, there are protests, here in Montana, which are unprecedented in numbers. There are libertarians, unaffiliated Republicans, Democrats who are out, but it's scary, because when you're protesting in Montana, people are coming through because it's an open carry state, right? That's scary. And I think even in the Jim Himes days, like that was intimidating. But I think that folks now just have this license, probably because look at the example, the super bad example we're seeing set at the top, that it is okay to verbally, physically attack. And in fact, I would say this president over the course of his presidency and certainly during his candidacy has encouraged his supporters to do so.
Encouraged, by the way,
told them go out and do it, right? Like
how many times did you hear Trump say, shame on you people in Pennsylvania for attacking Josh Shapiro, the governor's house on the first night of Passover? I didn't hear him once, the president once say a word condemning that. When Nancy Pelosi's husband got beat up, where was the outrage? And you are exactly 100% correct, Kathleen, where it's the top. Leadership comes from the top.
Well,
and we've got
and Bob, it's not like some, I mean, I don't have, pure thoughts all the time, right? But we are now in a world that it is okay to say anything to anybody, no matter, how hurtful or even more to the point, untrue, right? We're in this notion that we're in this post-truth world. And frankly, it's challenging in places where, the media, you don't have newspapers anymore. There's limited Wi-Fi, and there's this coalescing around these stories and these narratives that just didn't happen, when I was working for Jim. And so you're combating constantly these falsehoods, right? In this post-truth world. And all the time people are like, well, Biden did this or Kamala did this. And it's like, it's just not true. But we're dealing even more so. We're emotional beings, right? We deal with how we feel about stuff. But it's become way more easier to spread misinformation, paranoia, fear. And look, Democrats are subject to that stuff too. But Donald Trump is a brilliant marketer and a very charismatic person in so many different ways that people just want to believe him, or do believe him, because it feeds into their narrative about this world that feels so unfair to so many people, and talks not to our better angels, right? To our demons, which says someone's got to pay, someone's got to blame. Let's blame women, people of color, immigrants.
I spoke to a college student before the last election who has substantial debt and is a Republican, and was planning on voting for and did vote for Trump. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. If Kamala wins and she eliminates half of your college debt, will you accept those funds reduction? We take the reduction? Of course. Why shouldn't I? I said, well, wait a minute. Isn't that hypocritical? Isn't that obnoxious to say, I'm not going to support Kamala? And I support her very much, obviously, and I'm sure you did as well. Mm-hmm. But yet you're going to take the benefit. But I want to go one thing you mentioned. Well, there were several things you said we could talk about in the third hour of our conversation. But social media, as a lawyer, COVID contributes to where we are, in my opinion.
1,000%.
As a lawyer, I used to be in court before COVID as a litigator 4 times a week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, I was in court. And when you're in court, you'd see your other lawyers, not necessarily on the case you have, but you just see the lawyers you saw, whatever. Yeah. And you chat and you might settle cases. Nowadays, we have Microsoft Teams, which we use in Connecticut, and we don't go to court except for evidentiary hearings pretty much.
Right.
And you don't see, and so it's easier to be obnoxious. And believe it or not, I can be obnoxious, believe it or not.
What?
Yes, I know. Is it shocking?
Shocking.
But it's easier to be difficult or obnoxious or whatever, or not tell the truth, which you and I would always tell the truth. But when you're doing it on this screen, on a Zoom, on StreamYards, whatever, and not seeing people day to day, it's easier to be where we are in society. I don't blame that for the only reason where we are today, but not seeing people and being able to say anonymously,
Right.
Comments,
yes.
please.
Yes, 100%, right? It's like road rage, right? It's a lot easier when someone's, yelling and screaming at the car that they thought just cut them off, right? And then they walk into the grocery store and there's that person. And I think COVID created the sense of, isolation where, we're not doing potlucks with our neighbors. We're not running into them at the PTO meetings. We're not seeing them at the library. And so we're not sort of checking ourselves by sort of social norms to see and hear our neighbors and as people. And I don't just mean my neighbor living next door. I mean the person in the next state. Like the United States of America we're fractured. We're so fractured. And we don't have a lot of interest in, loving our neighbors, knowing our neighbors. And I'm an optimist too. I mean, I'm deeply afraid for our country, but I keep thinking like if we can reach out and understand that there are a lot of differences, and a lot of times that's what makes us stronger, but there's so much we have in common. Like most of us care deeply about putting a roof over our head and food on the table for ourselves and those we love. But we don't have those conversations anymore, right? We don't talk about, we just don't. We throw firebombs over Facebook or out of cars, and we just get more entrenched. And we're just in a very, very dangerous time that I just worry it's going to be our reality.
Well, and people I don't think always see, we only have 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
You're going to come back to my show. Promise?
Promise.
Yeah. We are in a situation where people are myopic, or they're small focused on small things. For example, the Garcia situation, some people are saying, well, he's not a good guy. He's a bad guy, whatever. He was a bad father. He got a DWI. That's not the issue. The issue is the rule of law, due
100%.
process. If in fact Pam Bondi, who was horrible in my opinion as Attorney General, but for her to say all these things, well, why don't you have your lawyers come with the evidence to court and have a hearing and show that Garcia is a member of the gang? If he's a member of the gang and a bad guy, Kathleen and I promise you, will fly him home ourselves. But let's have the hearings. And I heard a comment by Bondi recently saying, well, we can't have 350 hearings, whatever the number of people are who were shipped out of. What do you mean you can't? For the 1,500 people who attacked the Capitol, they had separate hearings. We have 2 minutes left, and I want to give you, for a change, the final word when Bobbio and Kathleen speak. So you said you're optimistic, and so am I. And that may be our theme for our next show.
Yeah.
Give me one thing that makes you optimistic about recapturing the America that you and I grew up in.
That I see so many people who didn't give a hoot about politics, who didn't give a hoot about who was in the White House. They are now out in the streets, rallying, protesting, talking to their neighbors. I see that in Connecticut. I see that here. I see a lot of young people. I see a lot of old people, and I do see that folks are both awake and waking up, that there's something going on, something really serious and not normal going on. And that gives me hope. That really gives me hope.
That's a great hope you gave. I have a little hope because I'm seeing the judiciary standing up. Although I'm a little disappointed that there has not been an official finding of contempt for what's been going on. When a judge asked me in court, especially a federal court judge, saying, Bob, go tell me why the grass is green. I'm going to have her and do it by tomorrow at 10 o'clock. You know that I will have that done by 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Right.
Kathleen, you are wonderful. It's been a pleasure. We are going to hold you to being on the show. And maybe someday I'll get a show of you, Congressman Himes, and me together.
So much fun. Let's do it.
Last time I saw him, I said to him how much I adored Nicole Wallace. And he said, so do I. This has been Bob Opatzner with the wonderful Kathleen Warner saying thank you very much. And let's be optimistic. God bless America.
Thank you, Bob.